This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode. Today I'm going to be talking to Dr. Catherine Clinton. We're going to be talking about the body as a concept of an antenna or a tuning fork to the environment. So this is going to be a really fascinating conversation. Please stay tuned for the entire episode.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Catherine. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Amazing.
I'm with the whole family headed to the robotic competition.
Amazing. Are you driving or are you passenger?
Passenger.
Oh, great. I was thinking that this is a bit challenging if you're driving at the same time.
Yeah. No, I'm just ready to have an awesome conversation about all of those things. The body as an antenna, water,
Yes.
fascia. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm really grateful that you accepted my invitation to come and do a live with me because I've been following your work for a really long time, and this is an area that I'm very passionate about in as well, the unseen world, how the invisible world of quantum biology impacts our very physical body, right, of what we can actually see with our eyes. And so I would love for you to kind of explain to us what your idea is about the body being an antenna. Like, how would you describe it to people?
That's a great question. I think that first I start with the idea of a liquid crystal. So we're very familiar with liquid crystal in our technology. The reason you and I can see each other right now and people can see us on this live is because our screens have this film of liquid crystal. And liquid crystal just means that it's in a mesophase between a liquid and a solid, and the molecules are aligned in the same way. They're ordered. And when a stimulus of electricity comes in, they all shift in a similar direction and they let different patterns of light come in. And that's how we have our screens, computer screens, TV, smartphone screens. But we have those structures in our body. Our cell membranes are liquid crystal, our fascia is liquid crystal, our DNA. And what we see is all of those liquid crystal structures are covered in liquid crystalline water, that easy cell-bound structured water. And that really acts as a receiver for frequency information of all kinds, whether we're talking about light, sound, whether we're talking about electromagnetic frequency, scalar, the quantum field, all of those things can be received and stored and emitted via this amazing liquid crystal capacity in the body.
Wow, that's such a great explanation. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about, about the body having crystals within and piezoelectricity. So something that you mentioned there about when electricity, basically is passed through those crystals, then they start, let's say, flipping or activating, a bit like dominoes, right? Is that what actually happens in a way?
Yes, it's almost like a huge crowd of people doing the same dance, right? So everybody's turning at the same time. Everybody's in sync. Everybody is ordered and aligned. I don't know. I'm sure people have seen videos of this where you have a huge crowd of people dancing the same thing and they're moving as one, or like synchronized swimming. It's not as popular anymore, but it used to be popular when I was a kid. And we'd watch everybody do the same thing in the pool at the same time. And that's the same thing that's happening with the liquid crystal. They're all ordered, and that means that you can get really precise effects, right? They're not a random hodgepodge of molecules acting dynamically but randomly. They're acting as a collective, which means that they can act in coherence. They can have this resonance with things in the environment.
So what happens if like those things are not working in coherence anymore? Like let's say that something inside or something outside of us disturbs the internal environment, such as, external or internal stressors. Like how does that influence the water / crystals in our body, and then what effects can we expect from that?
Yes, that's another great question. That looks like the receiver being bent or broken or damaged, right? When we're talking about fascia, we can talk about how the collagen becomes damaged with different toxins or injuries. So many things can damage these sort of delicate, intricate orderings of liquid crystal in the body, our the type of fats we're eating, our diet, our environment, our alignment with the sun. All of these things can add an obstacle to us acting as this incredible receiver to the energy in our environment. And it just looks like the antenna is sort of bent, right? It's not the same high quality receiver that it usually is. And when you're talking about the human body, or really any living system, we're awash in frequency information all the time, right? So every cell has its own frequency resonance, every organ, we have our own frequency as an entire body. So what we're looking at is the capacity for two or more waves to act as one and build amplitude, right? Like we would see in the ocean, two waves from different directions coming into each other, and rather than canceling each other out, they form a bigger, more beautiful wave. And that's what we're looking for in the body, this capacity to act in resonance and coherence. And when we don't have that, we have issues and disease onset and illness and symptoms.
So basically what you're saying is that the body is designed to be efficient. That's what it does. And the more coherent it is, or the more structured or the more aligned all the water networks and crystals are in the body, the more it can have a bigger butterfly effect, pretty much. You know, like the small ripple can become a massive wave efficiently, and then that can allow our system to do what it needs to do on a daily basis. I'm just trying to help the audience understand, like, why it's important to understand this concept of an antenna, the body as an antenna, because there are multiple things that the body attunes to, right, in nature. And maybe that's something I want to go into next. Maybe if you talk about what things does the body attune to, and why is it supposed to attune to those things? Well, we kind of talked about like the negative, or the side effects of being exposed to, let's say, non-native electromagnetic fields or toxins or blue light already. But what happens if we don't get the good stuff, and what is the good stuff?
Right. So let's break it down to another liquid crystalline structure in the body, our mitochondria, right? So our mitochondria are the membranes in them are liquid crystal, and they, again, act as receivers, and they are acting for receivers for light. We see that with ultraviolet light. We see that with red light. We see that infrared light can help build that liquid crystalline water on the outside of our mitochondria, on the inside. When we talk about the electron transport chain, those proteins that are lined up on the inner membrane, we see that those four proteins allow those electrons to quantum tunnel through them, getting to that fifth ATP synthase, that sort of rotor motor that turns and allows protons to go through the center of it to create ATP. That is all completely covered in water. That water is not only helping the conduction of electrons and the tunneling or jump conduction of protons to create ATP, but it's also acting as a receiver for that light information, that light energy. And we see the same thing with sound. Sound also is this incredible intervention for our mitochondria. Our mitochondria are really acting like portals, right? They are able to pull this information in and then send out biological messengers, or ATP, depending on the circumstance. And we know from the work of Douglas Wallace that any dip in our ATP production is going to lead to symptom onset, disease onset. Him and his colleagues have really associated this dip in mitochondrial function with every modern disease we know of. So
Yeah.
mitochondria are, yeah, I know you know. It's really foundational to be tending to our mitochondrial health. And we often think of light, we often think of food, we often think of some physical building blocks, right? Getting those fats in can be a wonderful way to skip over into that second mitochondrial complex and make the whole process shorter. We don't often think about sound being able to impact how our mitochondria are functioning, but it absolutely does. Same thing with the frequency of our thoughts and emotions. We know from the work of Martin Picard that our state of mind, the frequency of our thoughts, being in a meditative state, actually has a profound impact on the efficiency of the mitochondria in creating ATP. It's absolutely incredible.
That's so fascinating. Yeah, I mean, when you realize that actually that it's not just based on the food that you eat, or yeah, like just taking supplements, that how your body is able to produce this ATP energy, which we all know that the cellular energy for what the body needs to do to carry out its biological processes. So if it doesn't have this energy, and another thing which I have been recently figuring out is that the ATP that the body makes is actually to assist the body to make structured water. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. ATP really is another means of scaffolding. So ATP molecules go throughout the body and help maintain the structures of proteins. And we know that the conformation or the shape that a protein takes is how we get biological action. It's dictating what that cell is doing. And so this is another amazing role that ATP is playing. ATP is also a messenger in the body. So it isn't just the energy currency of the body, which is really important, right? But it also serves some other functions, which I think when we look at biological functions, we see that. We see that because of the complexity of a living system, oftentimes things are doing multiple things in the body at once.
So, like, what other things would it serve as a role? As we talked a bit about, like, the fact that it helps as a scaffolding mechanism and giving the body energy, but like, what other things would like ATP contribute to?
It also acts as a messenger, much like reactive oxidative species or reactive oxygen species or nitrogen species in the body. And we know that if we have too many of those species, we can have oxidative damage. But there's a way to look at all of these things as sort of a flux of energy in the body, that flow of electrons, that flow of protons, really having this dynamic balance and flux in the body. So it's not that, we often hear we need alkaline water and we need to drink just that. It's very helpful, right? It can be very helpful, and we see from some of the studies that's very helpful. But if we're in a static state of alkalinity, then that's not that flux that we see happening in a healthy, dynamic being. And so it's the same thing with all of these chemical messengers, right? None of them are really bad unless, like with reactive oxygen species, they become too high, or ATP, they become too low. But ATP is acting also as a cellular messenger. And it's incredible when we look at mitochondria, we often think of them as that little jelly bean, right, that we learned in school. But that is a mitochondrion in its danger state.
Mm.
When it's working in a functional state, these mitochondria stretch all over the cell. They can leave the cell. They create chains where they can shuttle electrons throughout the body to another cell, to another tissue that is energy deficient. So we always are constantly having this flux of energy and information. And we're very used to thinking of electrons as energy, right? We plug our devices into the wall. That flow of electrons creates that excitation and energy, powers our appliances. But protons also create electricity. And so you have this incredible flowing energy and information. Those particles can hold a tremendous amount of information. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at this liquid crystal capacitor, the body that's able to receive, hold, and transmit information. And that structure starts at the very external parts of our skin with our fascia and our collagen, and it's covered, lined in that liquid crystalline, easy, structured water. And that collagen matrix goes all the way down to our most internal structures. So we have this incredible body-wide quantum network that is taking in information, taking in energy, and turning that into this beautiful reservoir of energy that spans throughout the body, right? When we have UV light hitting melanin, it's again completely surrounded in this liquid crystal water that's split into molecular hydrogen and molecular oxygen. And not only is that creating this reservoir of energy for metabolic use, for biological function, it is then able to reform. So it's this renewable, it's almost like the water cycle that we see in the world around us, right? With the rain coming down and the evaporation and condensation back into clouds. We have this incredible system that allows us to have energy throughout the body and also information.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And when you realize that how the body is just literally a communication system from inside out, from the smallest, tiniest thing that you basically can see on a microscope all the way out to the outer surface of your skin, you realize, oh, it makes sense now why I need to spend time outside in the sun, or why I need to get grounded, or why I should incorporate sound healing or something like this, like you just mentioned. When we start to realize that how we are literally electromagnetic beings, not just biochemical, it's just we realize, okay, now there's a whole nother reality that is actually influencing my biology way more than just simply the food that I'm eating or the way that I'm exercising, for example, because this is what most people know, that if they just eat right or exercise, that they're sorted out. But then that's far from the truth, because I was in that state many years ago before I figured out Dr. Jack Kruse's work, and I found you, and I found many other awesome people who are spreading this incredible message. And it made me realize how I need to tend to my terrain, which is a phrase which you use very often. I need to connect with nature. And I used to know that nature connection is important, but I didn't used to understand why it's so important. But it's actually fundamental. And when we understand this concept of the body as a tuning fork or as an antenna, and it receiving information, but not only information, but also energy from its environment, then we can actually realize that, wow, like I actually need to make an effort to get into nature, because without it, my body just doesn't function as it should on a daily basis, right?
Yes, definitely. And it makes sense. There's a way that we can, I love the science. I think it's fascinating. I love going down rabbit holes and finding new science. But also, if we just simplify it, we evolved over millennia on this earth, right? And what we see now is this massive disconnection in modern life. We are inside a majority of the time in this very narrow band of LED, blue light dominant, which is very confusing for our biology, right? It increases cortisol, our stress hormone, blood sugar, all of these different things, not to mention the damage it can do to mitochondria. But it's this complete separation where we're separated from the temperature, the light, the sounds, the season. It's so important for us to remember that really the vast majority of our existence here has been in sync with the natural world, with the rising and setting of the sun, with the ground beneath our feet, with the sounds and the sights. I think even just listening to, I have a morning routine where I go out, I ground, I see the sun, I'm grateful for the sun, I hear all those bird songs, and for my biology, that sends a massive signal of safety. And we know that cells cannot function properly, cannot heal when they're in that constant state of danger. And that's what we have with our modern life. Like wake up at the alarm, which is that just in and of itself is quite stress inducing. Get ready for work, go from the box to the house to another box in the office, back into the car without spending more than 15 minutes outside. It's no wonder that we're seeing the state of health be so dire across the globe in modern societies.
You hit the nail on the head there, because so many of our problems arise due to us not spending enough time in a parasympathetic state, and we tend to forget how a massive impact our environment has on altering our nervous system state, right? Because now these days we have access to coffee, we have access to social media, we have access to many things which take us out of a parasympathetic state. And basically in the past, maybe if you drank coffee, you could bring your body back into a parasympathetic state pretty quickly because your environment wasn't so damaging without blue light or without non-native electromagnetic fields, without social media, like the overwhelm of you needing to be available 24/7 to everybody. I think about this concept all the time, when I think that I feel like I'm getting so many messages in a day. I feel so overwhelmed. I feel bad not being able to answering everybody. But then I need to also remember that now there's such a massive demand, like people expect you to also answer, within 24 hours. And it's absolutely brutal for your biology, especially as you grow like on social media and you become more like influential and your voice gets bigger. But that's a beautiful thing. Like, of course, we respect everyone and we appreciate you all here. But at the same time, it's so brutal on our biology. And I think it's so important for us to give each other a break, like to understand that if we don't get back to you like immediately, it doesn't mean that we don't like you. It just means that we're trying to take care of ourselves as well and not burn out at the same time,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think some people are kind of surprised when they receive that message a couple weeks later. It's like I'm here, I'm getting to my messages, but it literally can take me a couple weeks sometimes because we have to walk our talk, right? That's something I consult with a company, and the other day the woman said, she really walks her talk, that she's going to be outside, she's going to be walking during this meeting, and this is just what Catherine does. And it also invites people into that in their own lives. Like, oh, you too don't have to be available 24 hours. You too can go outside for your meetings. You too can have space to heal and process and just be human and just rest. I think that when we get in this seasonal rhythm, we understand, here I'm in the Northern Hemisphere in Oregon, and it is fall getting into winter, right? And so really respecting that flux of the seasonal energy and understanding that this is the time where I might not be as productive as I am at the height of summer. And my body feels it. My to-do list feels it. I'm not getting as much done in that sense, but I am really working that rest and repair. And when we look at that in nature, that's how it's working, and that's how it's working in our biology, right? That relationship between vitamin D that we cultivate over the summer, that is so important for so many things. Our immune system, it's anti-inflammatory, it's antioxidant, it influences hundreds of different biological functions. It helps regulate the mitochondria. And if we are getting out in that summer sun, if we're being seasonal beings as we should, we have adequate stores of vitamin D. And then coming into fall and winter, when the days are shorter and the nights are longer, we're able to produce and release more melatonin. We're able to have that restoration and that rejuvenation of the darkness. And the relationship between the two, we see that if we're looking at the relationship between vitamin D and melatonin, we see that melatonin is helping keep those stores of vitamin D, right? It is fat soluble. And if we have adequate stores of melatonin, i.e., if we are resting, if we're lowering the lights at night, and the night starts much earlier here in the fall and winter, and getting that production, that release of pineal melatonin, then we are able to keep those stores of vitamin D throughout the winter. So we see that our biology is made to be seasonal, right? We're seasonal beings, and resting is part of that. It's not always light, energy, movement, productivity. There's also that need for rest, that need for repair.
Yeah, it's so important to respect the cycles. And as you can see, like I've got my red lights on. It's only 5:30 in the evening, when we started our call, but it's already set outside the sun, right? So I'm trying to respect my biology and coming indoors, blocking all the blue light, wearing my red blue light blocking glasses, because I want to respect the melatonin release. Of course, I know I've got the EMF in front of me as well, but I'm trying to protect myself as much as I can to the extent that I can, and I think that everybody should try and make an effort, especially if they don't have to be at work, past dark hours, where you're exposed to artificial blue lights or non-native EMFs, which is putting our body again into a sympathetically dominant state. And if our body is in that state all the time, we are blocking melatonin release. So we are not respecting our body's repairing and healing mechanism, because just as like in a day and night cycle, we have basically the cortisol and melatonin, cycle, it goes also seasonally as well. Like in the summer, it's more, I would say, summer is like more catabolic in a way, but then like winter is more anabolic, which is basically like healing, repairing, getting rid of, mutated, broken down cells, fixing the body for what the body has gone through pretty much. But the sun is also giving us so much in the summertime. It's not black and white, anabolic and catabolic, but that's just like a metaphorical way that I like to view it, because that's the nature's way, right? When you look at trees, they lose all their leaves when it comes to wintertime. They're going to hibernation. They're respecting the cycle. They have to do that, otherwise they will die. Well, that's what happens to us, and we start to get dis-ease when we don't respect those cycles, because we know that when we don't release melatonin at night, we are not able to repair and regenerate and heal our body for the next day. And so we cannot wake up feeling refreshed and energized and feeling good for the day, right? And if our cortisol is all the time high, if we're all the time in a sympathetically dominant state, we're never able to heal and detoxify. And this is why, again, going back to the nervous system state, why it's so important to use nature as our guide to assist our nervous system state to be where it should be based on the season.
Yes, definitely. And I think that gets us kind of full circle back to those liquid crystal antennas in the body, that liquid crystalline water in the body that acts as receivers, because we've been taught for centuries, and this is still the dominant model in medicine. This is what I learned in naturopathic medical school, that we are chemical mechanical beings. Disease is a product of a chemical imbalance or a mechanical imbalance. Now, we know that that can be true, absolutely, but we also know that only explains a part of it, that there's something else going on. We are trillion. Yeah, absolutely. We're trillions and trillions of cells, and each one of those cells is completing hundreds and thousands of tasks each second. And mathematically, that's impossible with this random collision. That biological key is randomly bumping around the cell until it finds its receptor and unlocking. Well, we know it finds its receptor and unlocks, but the randomness is what we're calling into question. And I think that's this idea of frequency and resonance, right? We used to only understand if we want to get into our car, we use a key, a physical key to put in the lock to unlock the door. Now we can use frequency and resonance. We can use a fob. And even in a parking lot filled with the same model of cars, only one car will open to that frequency. And that's what we're talking about with nature, with seasons, with the temperature. And I think when we align to it, I know so many people are like, oh, I hate winter, I hate the cold, I hate the gray. But once we align to it, there is this natural craving for it. So at the end of summer, when the sun is going down and UVB sort of disappears from my environment, there is about a week or so where I'm like, oh, I miss the sun, like, oh no. But then soon the cold comes, and that's so invigorating, so great for our mitochondria. The infrared is always present, and then this ability to just harvest more melatonin, that also sort of becomes just as addictive as the sun. You know, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to sleep. I can't wait to lower the lights at night and have that deep restorative sleep that is just a different, it's just different in the winter. I enjoy my sleep in the summer, but that really deep winter sleep, that darkness, that longer capacity to rest and restore is just something that if we attune to it, we really start to crave it. And that frequency information is all around us in so many different types and forms.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's just all about respecting nature, right? And it's just the way that society has been built and the environment now has become so non-native to our biology, so artificial that it's able to disconnect us from reality. So when it's dark outside and we are at a supermarket or a shopping mall, it seems like daytime because everything is pretty much lit up, blue lit, you know, sound is like really loud and cars everywhere and headlights, and it just makes you realize how, like, you know, your body is not able to understand what's going on, and people think it's okay because they haven't heard you and me talking. But when they listen to this, they actually understand that, wow, like I need to be, if it's like dark outside, I need to get my ass inside as fast as possible because the outside world is quite toxic right now, and I need to be able to shield myself, you know, protect myself as much as I can. Unless you live in the woods or somewhere where there's no light pollution or sound pollution or something, and you can see the stars, you need to make the effort on a daily basis. This is not just like a one-time thing. It's just like the saying where they say one healthy meal is not going to make you healthy. The same thing is, you know, with the circadian rhythms and quantum biology, you need to put the effort in every single day because these are some fundamental biological processes that need to be occurring on a daily basis, because we shouldn't be wondering why cancer develops if we are not respecting these things that we are saying. We're not saying that you are going to develop these kind of things if you don't take care of yourself, but it's a part of the process, right? It's something that contributes, that if something is out of line, like this, which is so fundamental and it's impacting the biochemical level, like Dr. Catherine is saying, you can imagine what it's going to have on a structural level. So it's basically like 3 layers pretty much, right? We've got like the electromagnetism, we've got biochemical, and then we've got like the physical, what manifests into reality. It's a bit like how when we think and then we draw and then we then create and now become something into 3D reality.
I love that. I love that. Yes. And I love some of the researchers out there that are talking about our thoughts actually causing inelastic collisions of the molecules and that creating an electromagnetic pattern throughout the body. So we see how our thoughts can create an energetic pattern throughout the body that is actually influencing our biology. It's not all chemical, it's not all mechanical. And I think this is something that we've known as humans for a long time, and the scientific revolution did a great job kind of walking us away from that. And I think scientific consensus and exploration is really important, but I think when it goes to the extreme of saying observational medicine, observational science is not valid because we can't see it under a microscope, then it's like, okay, now we're going against everything we know. And it's so interesting. I'm working with a couple people on a research project about heart coherence and mitochondria because I really want to bring this forward in the research and in medicine, because when I talk about heart coherence, there will always be a handful of people saying that's just placebo, that is woo, and it's like, how did we get to a place where being in a state of gratitude or a state of love and awe and having that affect our biology is something we need to prove in science, but we are here.
Yeah, exactly. And you know that it's so funny. Well, what you can say to those individuals that how do you think Wi-Fi works? You know, it's basically you have a electromagnetic signal you can't see, and all of a sudden you've got signal on your phone and you see the images or whatever. Like your phone is basically the decoder of the information, right? And then the Wi-Fi is sending the signals, is the output. So basically, it's so important for us to actually understand that what we don't see has a massive effect on our biology. And this is exactly what we're trying to say to people today. So something that you mentioned before about the ROS, you said that it could be like a good thing to have a healthy amount of ROS like output from the cells. And that you know how we take all these antioxidants these days and all these supplements to shut down the reactive oxygen species and to shut down basically any oxidative stress in the body. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think that is a misguided practice. So when we have electrons going down the mitochondrial electron transport chain, that flow of electrons, that electrical current that's happening in that inner mitochondrial membrane, it's creating not only ATP, that energy source and signaling and scaffolding of the body, it's also creating water and infrared energy, which can help build into that liquid crystalline water. But at the same time as it's doing that, it's creating reactive oxygen species. And it's creating light, right? It's creating biophotons. It's such a beautiful process. Those reactive oxidative species, when they're in a Goldilocks zone, and that we can see that sort of term applied to so many things in the body. We don't want too much, we don't want too little.
Mm-hmm.
If we have too much reactive oxidative species, that can lead to oxidative damage. We can actually kind of view that as a deficiency in electrons, right? That can lead to obesity, metabolic issues, cardiovascular issues. But our reactive oxidative species are messengers. They influence our cell function. They influence our immune system, our metabolic rate. They have purpose in the body. And, you know, if we can have just a little bit of humility, we can understand that nature is very sophisticated and complex and intelligent. There's an intelligence there. So of course reactive oxygen species would have a purpose. And when we are taking antioxidants, we're doing a couple things. We are quelling that conversation in the body, so reducing those reactive oxidative species, reactive oxygen species, and nitrogen species. And that disrupts that natural communication that the body has, that it needs for ideal metabolic and biological function. But they're also acting as, in many cases, as uncouplers in the mitochondrial electron transport chain, right? So there are uncoupling proteins in that system that allow the mitochondria to take a rest or allow the mitochondria to divide. And when we are not allowing that natural flux between, like we talked about in the beginning, inflammation and an anti-inflammatory state, alkaline and acidic, if we're not allowing the flux of protons and electrons to happen naturally, then we get in a state where we're artificially pushing, uncoupling in the mitochondria, along with silencing that reactive oxygen species production. And that leads to a lot of things downline. So having a diet that's rich in local, seasonal foods will give us the things that we need as far as the basic building blocks, right? Proteins, fatty acids, really healthy fats, as well as antioxidants. And those antioxidants are going to be more powerful and more readily accepted when they are in that seasonal rhythm, when they're local, right? We know that the biophoton emission of seasonal local food is dramatically higher than if we are, like right now here in the winter, if I were to go buy a mango from my grocery store, which I can do year round, that signature in that mango is not only going to have a discongruent message for my biology, but the biophoton signature, the light signature of that food is going to tell my biology that I'm near the equator when I'm definitely not. I'm here in the Pacific Northwest and it's winter time. We have no mangoes here basically ever. So it's really important that we aren't taking these artificial doses of antioxidants, and that's something that's really popular in mainstream medicine, right? Like, oh, we're so inflamed, so let's artificially induce and flood the system with antioxidants rather than treating the cause of inflammation. I mean, we can clearly see that living in artificial lights out of sync with the rhythm of the sun, getting sun in the morning throughout the day, lowering the lights at night, living in an environment that is rich in this artificial LED blue, very narrow band of blue light, that in and of itself is very inflammatory.
Yeah.
It's very inflammatory. It's very metabolically chaotic, right? Telling our body to secrete cortisol and increase blood sugar at all hours of the day.
Yes.
So rather than treating the source of inflammation, we are really taking this Band-Aid approach that we see is so common in mainstream medicine without a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Wow, what a great explanation. I think everybody just got mind blown there about this about this topic, because this is so fascinating, and even I didn't understand the extent to why taking high doses of some form of antioxidant would be harmful. So thank you for illuminating that for us. That was really, really awesome. So for example, then, like a high ROS in the body, like what would that be like signaling in a way? Let's say that the body is producing a lot of ROS. Like, what would be something that the body is actually trying to get attention for? in a way.
Right. We can equate high ROSs with really highly productive mitochondria.
Okay.
So if our body's in a state of energy demand, then we're going to create a lot of ROSs. And that's a normal response to needing energy. But if we're in a state where we are artificially inducing that, then that's going to be problematic and it can cause oxidative damage. Absolutely. And we don't want that. We want that flux. We want to be able to have our morning start with that red dominant sunrise, that signal of safety that sends to our nervous system. That immediate looking at artificial light boosts our cortisol first thing. And we definitely want a morning boost of cortisol. Definitely. That is what is helping our biology get ready, our metabolism get ready. It helps our neurological function for us to be motivated and focused. But it should have a steady climb before that burst. It shouldn't have that burst when we're still in bed looking at our screens and that LED light causing that burst, right? That's a massive danger signal to the body. And that's going to create just that light through our eyes are going to signal to the mitochondria in our retina. And our retina is the most dense tissue of mitochondria. Of course, we have a lot in our heart. We have a lot in our brain because those are metabolically very demanding tissues. They're always doing work. But our retina, by far, are the most dense in mitochondria. And that signal of blue light tells our body, okay, oh, shoot, I missed the sunrise. Now I need to create cortisol. I need to create reactive oxidative species. And that blue light is causing this steady state of inflammation and high mitochondrial function when we need that flux, right? We need that flux throughout the day. And so that's what we see. We see that ROSs are made when electrons tunnel down the mitochondrial ETC and create ATP. And of course we want that. Of course we want ATP, but do we want our engines revving at high gear all the time? No, we don't. We don't. We want that flux. We want that rhythm. We want that flow. Yeah. Just like the sun rises and sets, we too need those periods of rest. So I think that's where we're really struggling in our modern health, is that we have so many things that push that reactive oxidative creation in the body, and it's not aligned with that natural flow. It's not because we are exercising or doing something of high demand. It's because of our light environment or our internal thought process or our work environment. All of these things leading to this rampant inflammation. And rather than tuning those in, we take a handful of antioxidants and then cause a whole different host of problems. Then we cause uncoupling. So our mitochondria are doing a completely different dance. And so it's just an interesting state that we've gotten into in modern life.
This is so important for people to understand, because it just shows you like how context is everything. That when you just look at ROS, we just simply think, oh, bad, like ROS equals bad. But when in reality, when we understand that there are certain situations that, that when it's caused in a healthy manner of the rhythms and the cycles of nature, it's a good thing. But when it's caused by artificial sources, then it's a problem and in excess. So one thing I wanted to ask you was about the ROS was when we are exposed to sunlight and we are getting the red and infrared light from the sun, or from red light therapy devices, right? We produce more reactive oxygen species, and in then in turn, we actually also produce cellular melatonin to help repair the cells, right?
Yep. Yes, yes. It's a beautiful design that the two go hand in hand. Yes, we are producing that inflammatory ROSs, but again, they're also cellular messengers. And at the same time, we're creating that cellular melatonin in the same place, right? In the mitochondria. So we have that dance between inflammation and anti-inflammatory response in the body. But if we continue to do that, and we see that with red light therapy, there is a point where it doesn't work anymore, right? It's not that adage, the more the better. There's a point at which it just doesn't work anymore, and the benefits fall off. Not that it becomes adverse for our biology, but we just don't see the benefits. And I think that that's where we get into a state where our body's like, okay, we've done this. We have created enough ROSs, enough ATP, and melatonin, and now we are shifting into a gear where we're not going to take in as much of that light information. And it's interesting when you look at the mitochondria, there are these different theories on how we're utilizing light, right? There's that sort of preliminary research that came out of Russia showing that our CCO in the mitochondria, that fourth step, that cytochrome C oxidase, is sensitive to red light, that it actually energizes that protein in the electron transport chain. Other research says that it's the water lining those proteins that's able to become excited and make the flow of electrons through our mitochondria more efficient. Other research is saying that oxygen, when it is entering into the mitochondrial chain, it is releasing energy in the form of going from a triplet to a singlet state. So there's all these different, some research out there is saying that red light is actually changing the viscosity of the water and allowing that ATP synthase protein to turn more efficiently and create a bigger magnetic field to pull that proton in to create ATP. And I think that we might find that it's probably a mix of those, right? When we look at our biology and living systems, it's always a mix of things. There's usually not just one thing that's happening. So it's such an incredible dance that we are doing with light and the mitochondria and water and breath. It's beautiful.
So yeah, it's great that you brought up breathing. So how does breathing influence our mitochondria? Because I know that the way that you breathe obviously is able to influence the amount of oxygen versus CO2 that you have inside of your body, whether you are mouth breathing or nasal breathing, and this balance is absolutely crucial for us to be able to absorb more oxygen depending on how you breathe, right? And so why is it important to be conscious and aware of how we breathe? What does this do on a cellular level?
Absolutely. So when we look at the state of oxygenation in the body, whether or not we have oxygen available to our cells, when we're looking when we're looking at that electron transport chain, that fourth protein, that fourth complex in our electron transport chain needs oxygen to be available so that it can act as a receptor and allow those electrons to tunnel and allow ATP to be produced. So when we are in a state of low oxygenation on a regular basis, right, when we are in that state often and for a long period of time, short periods of time we see can be really helpful, but long periods of time where we are constantly in a state of low oxygenation, that's just depriving our metabolic state, our mitochondria, of one of the main constituents that it needs to function properly. And so we often don't think of our breath being a cofactor for our mitochondria, but it absolutely is. And it does so much. I mean, our breath entrains us in so many different ways. I mean, when we look at the capacity of grounding, of going outside and putting our bare feet on the ground and connecting with that sea of free electrons that lines our earth, that's very powerful for our inflammation. But we often don't think about how we are also, when we do that, we're also aligning with the geomagnetic field, right? That geomagnetic field is 0.1 hertz. It's a very, very low frequency magnetic field. But when we're breathing in a calm, resonant way, our blood flow, that frequency matches and entrains with that geomagnetic field, that entrains with our breath, that entrains with our heart rate variability and that parasympathetic state. So we just see how amazing, how it's this really beautiful picture where every little part plays its own piece and entrains and acts in coherence with every other piece as well. And those are that frequency piece, right? That brings us back to what we started this conversation about, being a fractal antenna able to pick up on these frequencies in the world around us. So breath has so many different ways to influence our biology.
Yeah, that's so cool. And as you said, that like there are certain pieces of the puzzle which I think are more important, like what you just said about the grounding, for example. You just said that when we ground, our body now is able to, our heart rate variability and our nervous system is able to come to a regulated and more coherent state. So that automatically is able to make us breathe more natural. Whereas if we try and force, the breathing without, let's say we have been electrified by our electric fields in our house, radio frequencies, magnetic fields, all the artificial non-native EMFs and blue light. And then we try and regulate our breathing. It's kind of hard to bring our body back to a parasympathetic state just, from the breathing. I mean, it will help to a massive extent, but it's not going to help as much as getting grounded and doing that simultaneously at the same time, because it seems that, as we just said at the beginning, like you said, it has this big ripple effect, right? So it's a bigger wave. Whereas if we're just doing one little tiny thing, it's not going to have such a big impact. But if we're doing all the things, like getting the grounding, and then we're able to breathe more, how would you say, in coherence or more in alignment with the Earth's rhythm, which is fascinating. I always find myself as well, when I go to the sea, that instantly I find that my heart rate is automatically lower. I can do breath holding under the water so easy, because versus doing breath holding outside of the water, it's such a massive difference doing it there, because it just shows you that your body's getting so much benefit simply from the environment and how that's influencing our frequency inside our body. We're becoming the earth pretty much, as we're designed to be. But if we're disconnecting ourselves, then we become uncoherent, and then there is this disharmony inside of the system. And in a way, we can describe that as agitation and frustration. Our body feels like tense and hard, sympathetically driven. Whereas when we're in alignment with nature, our body wants us to be pretty much in a sympathetic state all the time, unless there is an actual physical threat that we need to run away from. That would be the only time pretty much that we would be in a sympathetically dominant state, running away or hunting or fighting or going into like a dorsal state or whatever, So yeah, it's fascinating when you understand how nature has such a huge role on every single system of the body. But so then we didn't say like how people should breathe, because I think that it's important to, tell people like how you should actually breathe, since we talked about the breathing, because nasal breathing, that your nose is designed for breathing. You can't eat through your nose, right? So I think that it's so important for people to understand that when you keep your mouth closed, you're able to balance the gases between the oxygen and carbon dioxide. The higher the carbon dioxide in the body, the more oxygen we can release from the red blood cells to be able to be utilized inside of the system. Whereas when we mouth breathe, we are off gassing too much of that carbon dioxide, which people think is just a waste gas or it's not good. Like, it actually has a very important role in the body, just as we said, like about the ROS, that has a fundamental role as well. So these things that are just seen as something unnecessary or bad are actually the body's way of getting a signal, or using that signal to be able to get an outcome from that. So when we are doing breath holding, for example, and we are sitting on a chair holding our breath, and our CO2 levels are rising inside of our body, we are basically sending signals to our brain that, hey, like, I'm starting to run out of oxygen, so you should probably let go of all the oxygen that you have so I can use it, so I can survive. And this is basically a survival mechanism, but at the same time, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
Absolutely. That idea of hormesis, right? Those little stressors really acting to fine tune our biology. And yeah, breath is foundational. Nasal breathing, deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, it sends a signal throughout the body, and that signal entrains other biological processes, right? So we're talking about states of oxygenation throughout the body, but we're also talking about our heart rate. We're talking about our neurological function.
Yes.
We're talking about so many different things because of this frequency aspect in the body, because we are a coherent fractal antenna. We have that capacity to create and ripple out frequency throughout the body.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just makes you realize that, how much power you have over your entire system just through the breath. There must be a fundamental reason why that is pretty much one of the only processes in the body that we can actively, or with our own participation, are able to control, so that we're able to therefore influence every other system of the body, right? You can't determine what's going to happen to your brain. You can't determine what's going to happen to your other organs, but you can definitely influence what your lungs are doing. And by influencing that, you're able to influence your heart and your nervous system. And then it has this whole cascade of effects. So it's pretty awesome when you realize the power of the breathing, and when you understand how to manipulate it in a positive way based on the circumstance.
Definitely. It's a beautiful system, truly.
And so you talked about the sound, and we didn't really discuss, what type of sound would be so like beneficial for us. You talked already about, the sound of nature, and, listening to the birds and all of this good stuff. Like, what about humming? What's your thoughts on humming?
I love humming. I love toning. Self-generated sound creates that same effect in our nasal cavities, right? It increases the nitric oxide in our nasal cavities. It allows us to dilate those vessels and pull in more oxygen. It increases oxytocin and serotonin, those feel good, feel loved hormones. It increases dopamine. It increases melatonin. It increases cellular melatonin.
Wow.
So you have this beautiful way to kind of shift all of these different biological markers in the body. It increases vagal tone and heart rate variability. And these things that we're talking about are all free and accessible for people to do. So I love humming. I'm not a huge fan of flying. And it's a good thing that airplanes are so loud, because you'll find me humming to create a better state, because I really like to be on the ground. So when I'm in
Yeah.
an airplane, I'm often just humming for a majority of the flight,
Yeah.
to help regulate my nervous system and get all of those things that a flight kind of takes away from me.
Yeah.
So I think it's an incredible intervention. And again, something that we've really known about and utilized as humans forever. Chanting, humming, toning, prayer, these things are something that we've utilized for millennia as humans. And now we're kind of getting that scientific validation of the importance of something like that.
Yeah, and then that speaks to the fact of what you mentioned earlier about how thought can influence the mitochondria, because when you think and then you say what you think with intention, that is like literally vibrating your vocal cords, and that vibration, I bet, is influencing the water networks in our body, right? Like
Yeah.
literally the structure of the water inside our body. So that's having such a massive effect on our biology, and this is why we must be very careful about what we are thinking and what we are saying. Even, I think, even more important, what we are thinking, because we are kind of careful about what we say to certain people. And except on social media these days, it's too easy for for people to say whatever they want because they're behind the screen. But when you're actually speaking, you're more careful with what you actually say. And then I think that it's so important to be able to be conscious about your thoughts as well, your inner dialogue, what that's actually doing to you on a cellular level.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And when we understand that the powers of light and sound to influence our biology, to influence that water within us, lining our cells, lining our fascia, then we understand that our thought process and all these other things can also create that light pattern. And it just brings it full circle into this greater understanding of how light, how the frequency of our own thoughts and emotions, how sound, how frequency of electromagnetic fields, scalar, quantum fields, the biofield, right? This subtle energy that we talk about, how all of these things could have and do have such a massive impact on our biological state.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Like, are you running out of time, or I want to be respectful of your time? Are you ready to go?
We just got at the robotics competition.
Uh-huh. Okay, okay. So are you do you have more time, or are you needing to go?
I have a few minutes. Yeah, I'll need to wrap up
Okay, okay.
soon, but I have
Okay,
a few minutes.
I
Yeah.
just checked my list of questions to make sure that we haven't missed anything. But it's really crazy because pretty much you were able to answer most of my question. I was thinking that you can see my questions from there.
It's that
So,
frequency antenna.
yeah, yeah, absolutely telepathic. Yeah, you were totally on the right path. You were even going in the exact order in which I wrote it, which is pretty wild.
That is wild.
That, that's crazy. So yeah, you already talked about the heart and how important it is. Like, so most people, they think of the heart as a pump, right? But it's so much more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It does have some pumping capacity for sure, but when we look at the heart, it's one muscle, it's one band, and
Yeah.
because of that band, it creates this twisting when it
Okay.
pumps, right?
Yeah.
It's not just an implosion where it collapses onto itself. It's
Okay.
twisting. And that twisting creates a vortexing. And that vortexing helps energize and create this structured water flow throughout our anatomy. And so we have this kind of dual thing working there where our blood vessels are lined with this crystalline water, with this structured water, this easy water. And when our heart is pumping in the way that it does, it's creating a vortex of that fluid, of that blood, which
Wow.
is also creating an energetic pattern and the structuring of that water. And the heart is, we can't think of it as a resonator. It has thousands the magnitude of the electromagnetic field of the brain. Our heart has an enormous magnetic field, and this has been measured by squid meters. So I'm not just talking about, our emotions. I'm talking about physical measurements of these fields. And this is something that's not new, right? We have measured our EEGs in the brain and EKGs in the heart.
Mhm.
So we're used to talking about this in medicine. We're not used to talking about the heart as a resonator and this function it has of entraining things in our body. So our
Mm.
heart has an intrinsic neuron system. And these neurons are like a little brain. And if we look at what's happening neurologically in the heart, our heart is sending out more neurological messages than it's receiving. It is this incredible regulator. And when we're in a space of heart coherence, and that just means that we're kind of aware of this heart space. We are in a pattern of deeper breath and an emotional state. And we can get into this more, but an emotional state of gratitude or love, then we're wiring our frontal lobes. We're not wiring our amygdalas that are in charge of fear. We are having a much more calm, rational, neurological pattern. And this heart-brain coherence spreads throughout the body, right? It's this ripple of frequency that goes throughout the body. And it entrains other functions as well. And I think that oftentimes, Heart Math Institute has done incredible research on heart-brain coherence. And I think we often talk about these positive emotions of gratitude and love and awe being a regulator and a producer of this heart-brain coherence. But I also think that we should be mindful that when we're talking about coherence, we're talking about two or more things working as one. Two people dancing the tango, for example, right? When they are in coherence, they're dancing this incredible, beautiful dance. When they're incoherent, they're stepping on each other's toes, and it's just a mess. We can be in a state of coherence, I believe, in emotional states that are not as positive, like anger, fear, grief. I think that we see the issue with emotions and emotions we deem negative emotions being that friction that we often have with emotions, where we say, I'm angry and it's your fault, or I'm fearful and I'm judging that, or it's our reaction to that fear or that emotion. When we can actually feel those emotions without judgment, without the need to suppress or turn it onto someone else, I think that we can still be in that state of heart coherence and still in that state of heart-brain coherence. I've been put on some very sophisticated heart rate variability monitoring and heart coherence monitoring. And I was having different procedures, and I was being led through this kind of emotional release where I felt extreme grief. I had all these kind of emotions that you would term negative,
Yeah.
but my heart coherence was huge. I maintained this heart coherence because I was just letting those feelings flow. And I think sometimes we make the mistake of saying, it's only the state of gratitude and love. Like we're
Yeah.
only meant to have those emotions. We're humans. It's back to that flux, right? We're meant to have all these emotions. It's when we get stuck
Yeah.
or when we create this friction to those emotions, then it becomes a problem. But our heart is an amazing resonant leader of the body. And it's incredible to see the power that it has in regulating our body in so many different levels.
Oh yeah, what a brilliant explanation. Thank you so much for that. And there's a reason why people say that, listen to your heart and your gut rather than your brain,
Yeah.
because your brain is like sometimes it can be, very left brain analytical, and
Yeah.
we can just think like this is what it is in the way that we are thinking, in the way that we perceive our reality based on, what we have conditioned ourselves. But our heart and our gut is able to intuitively know the actual truth. We're able to find the deeper meaning and the reality from within, in that innate intelligence, like you just mentioned, that our brain can easily trick us. Well, Dr. Catherine, I want to be respectful of your time, and thank you so much for coming and having this conversation with me. I think we've gone over so much great and valuable information today, and I hope this helps to spread our message as far as we can about the body being as an antenna, as a receiver, as a decoder of information, how important it is to be aligned with nature and to be able to minimize all the stresses of life, because this is what it is to be human. It's to be in connection with nature and to be able to thrive, because when we are in connection with nature, we are basically thriving. When we are not, we are in dis-ease. So this is why it's so important that we are able to keep on hammering that message home. And I'm going to be repurposing this on my YouTube channel and also on my podcast on Spotify. So I would like for you to tell people where they can find you and work with you and get in touch with you.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me on. It was wonderful to talk with you and to spread this information. You can find me. I didn't get creative. I'm just Dr. Catherine Clinton. That's my website. That's my handle on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. I'm just Dr. Catherine Clinton, and I love sharing this information. It's free, it's accessible, and I really believe that the power comes from the bottom up, and that means that we have to be strong and we have to be resilient, and these interventions are free and accessible. So I love sharing this information.
Oh, thank you so much. What a brilliant episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Catherine, and I hope you have an awesome day.
Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful evening and a great melatonin-rich sleep.
Oh, absolutely. I'll try after this, mind-blowing episode. I'm going to be processing all this information in my dreams.
This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.